Right. So one of the big questions that often arises in bid committee meetings is that of the membership of bid committee meetings relative to the BEC and the BSC. Interesting enough, we're not going to get into the BAC membership issues today. The focus today is the BEC. Should members of the BEC have members of the BSC? And for those of you who are in local government, you might be thinking, well, there's no question on that point, Sean. So let's quickly have a look then at what the PFMA says, what the MFMA says. We'll briefly look at the draft public procurement regulations. Sorry, the draft public procurement act, not the regulations. We'll briefly discuss some of the origins of bid committees, particularly around cross-functional sourcing teams, a question on case law, and then I'm going to ask you what you believe should it be in the regulations. What should we have, if anything, in the regulations on the rules regarding membership of the bid evaluation committee? So let me get straight into it. This is the PFMA. The PFMA, there's not a lot of detail in the PFMA on the membership of the bid evaluation committee. Just that it should be cross-functional. They will recommend reports to the bid adjudication committee, but they won't have any voting powers at the BAC. It should be cross-functional, composed of supply chain practitioners and officials from the user departments requiring the goods or services. But also that the accounting officer can use the services of another institution's bid committees if and when required. And that certainly does pop up at times. I know recently in Gauteng, we've had a new public entity that was started in Gauteng, and until such time as they really got going, they used the members, or they used the bid committees of another institution in order to help them get going with their procurement needs. So not very prescriptive from a PFMA perspective. MFMA is a little bit more prescriptive, and you might recall that in the early days of the PFMA and the MFMA regulations and the guides, MFMA typically lagged behind. And I've always found it useful to look at the two, because the MFMA very often picked up and improved on some of the aspects that we saw were lacking or were not that clear in the PFMA. So in the actual guide, the accounting officer should appoint a bid evaluation committee for the evaluation of bids, to establish the committee structure, utilize the committee structure of another municipality if necessary. Accounting officer who initiated the requirement will be accountable for the decisions taken. The actual regulations did not go into very much more detail. Officials from departments require the goods or service at least one supply chain management practitioner of the municipality. Now you'll see this crops up later in exactly the same format in the draft public procurement bill. Followed that same structure. So that's the regulations in MFMA. The actual model policy in MFMA, bid evaluation committee must define what to be composed of. They are very, very similar. But then when you start to see in the MFMA, you'll see that here we are. It is recommended that the bid evaluation committee be constituted with different members as that of the bid specification committee. And only where not possible, the bid specification committee and bid evaluation committees have the same membership. So in the MFMA, it's been the trend, and I'm going to start a little poll now on having separate members between BEC and BSC. And that's been very different in PFMA, where many PFMA institutions use the same members that were in the BSC also became the same members in the BEC. So let me start this poll, and I'm going to let this poll run for a little while. Now you'll see in the poll there are actually 3 questions. The first one is for PFMA, the second one is MFMA, the third one is FUMPLA, provincial legislatures and parliament. I've also included tertiary and others. You can decide which one you want to enter. And it's basically saying, right, if you're in the PFMA, the BEC can have the same members, the BSC or MFMA, you can have your perspective, and then also FLUMP and others, if there are members from provincial legislature that might be there. So 3 different questions. Let's see what the responses are. I'm going to let that run for a little while and just continue now with this discussion. We're going to come back towards the end of the session and ask you what should it be in the Public Procurement Act regulations. So very clearly, the PFMA is not prescriptive in terms of the BEC membership having an overlap with the BSC, Bid Evaluation Committee having an overlap with the Bid Specifications Committee. But the guide does certainly say that in the MFMA, they should be, as far as possible, be different members. Now, the draft Public Procurement Bill had in it very, very similar wording to what we've got in the MFMA regulations. The Bid Evaluation Committee must consist of at least 3 members, of which the chairperson. Other members must include a supply chain management practitioner and where practical and end user of the institution, and be composed in such a way that it is cross-functional of the activities of the institution. Now, this was in the early draft of the Public Procurement Bill, but this never made its way into the final Public Procurement Act. And I would guess that the drafters of the Public Procurement Act regulations are probably going to include something along these lines in the regulations. So let's see what comes of that. Now, one of the questions that I've always asked is, where does this whole bid committee system come from? Where did it originate? What was the original thinking behind this? And I always go back to the team that were around at the time, and particularly the leader at the time, William Malinga. William Malinga came from and had a lot of experience in the private sector. You might all be interested to know that. In fact, one of my colleagues that I worked with for many years worked with William Malinga in the private sector, in the mining industry. And William was very strong on strategic sourcing, and he was very strong on this notion of cross-functional sourcing teams. Now, this is from a survey that was done very many years ago on cross-functional sourcing teams. It was an international one, 1994, you can see there. It talks about the procurement teams being cross-functional. Major part of the new organization structure, cross-functional sourcing teams consist of personnel from at least 3 functions. Interesting, the 3 that crops up. And if you recall, in the draft public procurement regulations, there was mention of at least 3. And they would include and have assignments where the team would consider purchasing goals and decisions involving the supplier-based management. Now, I'm going back to this old survey that was done in 1994. I mean, this is 30 years ago. Because there's not a lot of course, there's no regulation on cross-functional sourcing teams in the private sector. They don't have regulations as we do in the public sector. But you'll see here that the cross-functional sourcing team's roles and responsibilities includes everything that a typical BSC would be involved in, as well as through to, now you see the word award here in this context, it was primarily around evaluation and award, and then implementation. And so the whole notion of a cross-functional sourcing team is that you put a team together that has within it the person who's going to be left holding the baby, if you like. The person who will, at the end of the day, have the contract that they're going to be managing, or at least be representative of those that would be managing the contracts that would arise out of this strategic sourcing process that would happen. And so a cross-functional sourcing team does all the market research of the suppliers that are out there, understands what the demand is within the organization, determines what their strategy would be to source, the sourcing strategy, if you like, to source the goods and services that they require. That team gets involved in the evaluation process, the awarding process. The team then also very often continues and helps to monitor and manage the contracts that arise out of that. So you'll see this idea of a cross-functional sourcing team is not multiple committees. It is a team that would be focused on a commodity or a category. And that team would very often continue and be part of the structure of the organization. So that's where it comes from. And one of the benefits of this is that you have a cross-functional perspective that is brought into the sourcing process, but substantially and significantly, the person or persons who are going to be left with managing the contract are part of the process from day one. There is a question, however, on independence. And since I put out the topic, I've had some calls and people contacting me, and they have very strong opinions on this matter. And one of the very strong opinions is that there should not be an overlap between the BEC and the BSC. Because if you do have a bid evaluation committee that comprises members of the bid specification committee, those members in the BEC do not often make the difficult calls that have to be made when they're evaluating. And one of those difficult calls that needs to be made is the call to say, you know what, our specification was not good. Our specification had flaws in it. Our specification was vague. There were uncertainties within the specification. Now, the all-pay case raised this very clearly to say that if you've got a specification which is vague or is uncertain in any ways, it is considered unconstitutional, unlawful. It is unfair. Vagueness is based on the rule of law, which is the foundational value of our Constitution. And that doctrine of vagueness they spoke about in the all-pay case was very interesting. And so many people have got the point of view or the opinion that says, you know what, if you've got a bid evaluation committee that is the same as the bid specification committee, they're not going to make this call. They'll do what they can to make the bid specification process work. And they will interpret things in a way that they thought it should be interpreted. And that can result then in some real issues that result at the end of the day. So on the one hand, you've got in the private sector and in the history that we've got in the private sector of cross-functional sourcing teams that ensures that there's some ownership that exists through this process. There is a common thread of people involved in right from the early market analysis stage right through to the implementation stage. But yet we've got this important notion of independence in this process. And that if you've got a bid evaluation committee that is not necessarily as independent and as objective as they should be when it comes to evaluating, that we could then have some challenges. And so the question then is, what should it be under the Public Procurement Act? Because there clearly are pros and cons to each point of view. If you've got common members and you've got the same members that were in your BSC become the same members in the bid evaluation committee, you've got ownership of the process. You've got ownership of the outcome. You've got a team of people that it may not be the best, but they will run with this process and make sure that there is somebody that is evaluated and appointed and recommended, if you like, to the bid adjudication committee. However, if there are different members, then it certainly improves the objectivity of the bid evaluation committee. But possibly the best is that there is a combination of both, where we have the best of both worlds, where we've got members who were in the bid specification committee are appointed to the bid evaluation committee, but then we add more members to the bid evaluation committee to bring in some objective perspectives, people that can challenge some of the thinking that might have been there and might have come through from the bid specification committee. And so the question therefore is, what should the regulations be? Should they be prescriptive? What should they do? So let's have a look then at the poll that we've got running at the moment. I'm just quickly going to go and see where that is. We've got a good number of you that have participated. There's still many more that can. I'll share the results of this shortly. So the first thing that we're asking there is, what is your current perspective on this one? From a PFMA perspective, just ask PFMA if you're PFMA. If you're MFMA, just ask the MFMA one. Certainly, the BEC can be the same members of the BSC if PFMA, or you might have a different perspective on the MFMA side. And let's see if there is anybody that responds then to the thumbler. There certainly are. Let me take a question then from Sanele before we close this poll and I share this with you. Hi, Sanele, welcome. Let me just quickly allow you to unmute. Go ahead, Sanele.
Hi, how's it, colleagues? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to you.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
I believe
No,
it's
no, no.
cloudy
It's
and rainy and wet in your part of the world.
yeah. Hey, but it seems like it's on and off. I think in some of the some part of the provinces is quite terrible.
Shame.
Yeah, but
Good.
my
Let's go. Yeah.
yeah, my point on this one is that it is advisable to have members of the BSC as members of the BEC. Why I'm saying that is that during the evaluation, it has been identified that the BEC need that wisdom.
Yeah.
From the drafters of the terms of reference or from the drafters of the specifications. What was in your mind when you were drafting these terms of reference? Because some of the cases where the bids are rejected or are referred back for re-advertisement, you find that there was probably a lack of understanding on the side of the BC. And when maybe they get to BAC, the BAC maybe differ with what the BC is saying because maybe they have a different view on the subject matter. Now, when it comes to issue of the conflict of interest, I think that's one thing that can be managed because we shouldn't then be be having more people from the same line function or from the same project, having more numbers in each committees because that's when obviously they would vote in as a block.
Right.
Sure. That's the first point. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah. Sonele?
Yes, Sean. Yeah, that was my point.
Thank you. Good one. Let's jump to Busi and then we'll close the poll straight after Busi. Go ahead, Busi.
Thank you, Prof, and greetings to all members on the call. I think my contribution is not far from what Sanele has just shared now. On top of that, having them on BEC makes the BSC members understand the impact of the decision they take when they are approving this specification. Like, for instance, I'll make an example, they will always say that they want a certified copies of qualification. And when we get to BEC, this copy is not certified, but they have approved it. Now, BEC has to make a discretional decision, and it becomes a mess. So when you have them there, they understand the impact of the decision that they make during a BSc. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Brucey. Let me end the poll, and if you're almost there, I'll just give you a couple more seconds. Khomotso, go ahead. Let's listen to Khomotso, and then I'll end the poll. Go ahead, Khomotso. Welcome.
Good morning, colleagues. Morning, Sean.
Good morning.
Last year, October, I attended a training with the University of Pretoria on BSc and actually PFMA as a whole, and then BEC committees.
Was that one that I did, Khomotso?
No, it's the one that I attended with the University of Pretoria.
Okay. I did do one at Pretoria, which is why I asked. Go ahead, Khomotso.
Okay. From the workshop, what we have learned was that there comes a time where one member of the BEC might be needed in the BSc.
Or the other way
it
around.
Is not a must for, yes. One member of the BSc to be there in the BEC, but it is not a must. However, they've emphasized that when you do your specifications, your terms of reference, there must be very clear, very clear and open explained that the next person who would be reading, interpreting, and may not need a third party to come and explain something else that is in there.
Yeah.
Meaning that whoever would be sitting in the BEC would have a clear understanding of what it was meant by the BEC when they said that they wanted 1, 2, 3. And then when you're evaluating with having full knowledge of what is it that is wanted. The other thing that they've emphasized is for the end user division to be there in all committees, the BSc, the BEC, and the BAC. The reason for this is that when you're sitting in the BEC evaluating, and then there's something that you are not entirely sure about that is going to be meeting the end user's demands, you confirm with the end user, is this exactly what you meant in the specification by 1, 2, 3? Then the end user can indicate that yes, that is exactly what was meant, or no, that is not what was meant, and then they give further explanation of that, and then you can be able to take a decision therefore. I thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Khomotso, it's interesting, yourself, Brucey, and Sanele have raised this point. And I hear you, and I hear the practicality of that. So what you're saying is we need somebody from the BSc to be in the BEC meeting because the specification was not clear. And we need somebody from the BSc to explain to us what they meant. Now, is that
only when the specification was not clear?
Is that not an issue? Because if you've put a specification out which is not clear, you can be challenged and you will lose. Right? Because it's a fundamental requirement that you put out a spec which is clear. You put out a spec which is not vague, which is not uncertain. Interesting, hey?
Yes, no, fully agree, Sean.
All right, let's go to Khao and go ahead, Khao. Good morning.
Morning, Chair. Morning, everybody. I think, Sean, you have made my point, but I would like to qualify it with what the law says. The generation
which law, Khao? You got to be specific now. Which law?
I was just quoting it when you interrupted.
Oh, my apologies.
Treasury Regulations 16A62
Yes.
B says the supply chain management system must, in the case of procurement through the bidding process, consist of the BSC, BEC, and BAC. Now, for the exact point that you are making, I think I don't want to argue on the intent of the legislature when they put this in the prescripts. But I think it was precisely because the legislature wanted independence and objectivity. And for a tender that goes out, because it does not go out to the BEC or the BAC, it goes out to members of the public. They must know in clear and not vague terms or uncertain terms what is it that the institution wants to procure.
Yeah.
It's not for the BEC, it's not for the BAC. It's for the man out there who reads and is interested in participation. And I think if you read this 16A62, B is exactly what the legislature intended. So what is my point and what is my position? My position has been and is that yes, you can have some members in the who were in the BSC, in the BEC, just for continuity, but not for them to explain what was supposed to be clear in the first instance through the advert, just for continuity and to make sure that if need be, they can simply just revert back and say, but when the specs were formulated and signed off and approved, this was what we intended. Not for them to repeat and clear it to everybody. So yes, not all of them, but some. That is the position that I'm taking.
Got you.
Thank you, Chair.
Good one, Carl. Thank you. Thank you very much. Andre?
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, for me, the two needs to be different because the work of your BSc is to...
Andre, just give us your perspective. MFMA?
MFMA, yes. Yeah. MFMA.
Yeah.
So for me, it is that the two needs to be different because the job of your BSc is to put out what the entity needs.
Yes.
And how they need it. Then the document goes to the public to complete it and to say, do we comply with what you require? Now, if that document goes out to the public, there might be a clarification meeting, which means that the document gets amended if the need be.
Correct.
Now, if that is the information that the public has, that information should also suffice for your BEC, because they need to evaluate what is in front of them in terms of the tender document that went out. And that is the only evaluation that they can do based on what was presented to the public and what the public has completed on that. So there's no clarity that can be done. There can no be correction that can be done for something that occurred, especially if it's of a material nature to the document, that the BSC can now come and correct it in the BEC. No, it doesn't. So for me, for all three should be different because then there is a better, how do you call it, a better accuracy from one committee to another. Because if we have the same members of the BSC to the BEC, you're giving the BSC time for correction, and that can never be.
Yeah.
That's my thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Good one. So Nella, I'm just going to end the poll now and share this, and then you're welcome to come in. So Nella, I'm just going to end it. Let me share it and quickly run through what the results are. So I'm sharing it now, and you can see very clearly that there is a clear difference between PFMA and MFMA at the moment. So PFMA, it's like it can be the same, Some are saying it should not have any members, but then there's quite a large number that is saying that the BEC can have some members from the BSC, but MFMA is very, very different to that. There's strong points of view that the BEC should not be the same by 47% to 21%. And the others are saying that it can have some members of the BSC in it. And then FUMPLA, I'm not sure, quite a high number of people that are there. I'm not sure if that is really relevant to us. So let's just stick with those first few. Sanele, go ahead. What's your thoughts?
Thanks, Sean. Very interesting, comments from the colleagues. I wanted to also weigh in on Andre's comment to try and provide my thoughts around it. And I agree with him that in an ideal world, that's how should we implement the bid committee system in an ideal world. However, I've been around few institutions, and it seems like there is no ideal world in the application of the bid committee system and the SCM processes in general, because that segregation and independency, as much as it's required, however, if you implement it, it's gonna delay the procurement that you want to achieve, simply because of the continuous failures that may arise or that continuously arise during the assessment of these tenders. What Mrs. Ngobo said is that the BSC members, one of the challenges that you'll find in various institutions is that the BSC members have a lot of wish list, and they can make you buy you a flying pony, and sometimes it's not achievable. They are not there during the evaluation or during the adjudication. And the moment you form part of the evaluation and you are now required to evaluate this specification that you crafted, you'll come back a changed man. You'll come back and realize that whatever that you were saying, at some point we were far-fetched. So you need that link between these two committees. Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Thank you. Let's go to Dalil, and then we'll go to Andres. Hi, Dalil.
Hi, good morning, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Dalil, welcome.
Yeah, just an interesting 2 cents from my side. Yes, I think from MFMA side, I think the last couple of years, there was a big fight from the Auditor General in terms of the definition of a senior manager, because the composition of the BEC is clear in terms of the MFMA space. It must be directors. Now, all of us reporting to our directors are either in BID specs or in BEC. My question to us colleagues in the fraternity is, why would the regulator then brought in that one particular thing that says, if the BAC differs from the BEC, it must go to the accounting officer. If the accounting officer agrees with the BEC, then everyone is happy. But if the accounting officer agrees with the BAC, it must go to the Auditor General. There's a lot of thought in there. There's a lot of wisdom in there.
There is.
So what I want to add to what Andre was saying, I think by saying that the person who wrote the legislation might have had in his mind, I need to protect the BEC as a technical committee with credibility, must, like in our instance, it's junior officials, but they're not in the chain. So if there's an appeal, anything, then no one is above the law. And I think I just want to bring that in terms of the credibility of your BEC. Because if the legislator is clear that if even the BAC, whose directors differ from the BEC and goes to the county officer and he goes with his directors that were appointed by the mineral committees and things, it's a lot of power.
Yeah.
Why would it then need to go to the Auditor General and National Treasury? So that's my little 2 cents.
Well done, well done. Thank you, Dalil. Dalil, I assume you're in the Western Cape, eh?
Yes, yes.
Welcome. Well, we're going to jump now to KZN. Hello, Andres. Welcome.
You meaning Eastern Cape?
Ah, sorry, Eastern Cape. Sorry, Andres.
Yeah. Good morning, colleagues. Sorry for joining late.
A little bit further up
I had a bit of a technical issue here with a new device that I'm using that is not yet set up for Zoom. So that took me a while to get the thing working. But yeah, now I'm clear on the conversation, and I think we need to be a bit more practical. Firstly, there was a specific question asked: should we change legislation? I say less legislation is actually better, because the more we make rules, the more opportunities there is to break rules.
Yeah.
And I think we need to rather focus on principles than necessarily specific checkbox exercises. Checkbox exercises has gotten us into deep hot water in many instances already. So from my perspective, firstly, the previous colleagues has mentioned it, and I maybe just want to reiterate it, that the feedback loops between the committees is critical for the system to become mature.
Yeah.
And that's what you're actually seeking for. I don't think the committees must be a people-driven process. It must rather be a policy-driven process or a principle-driven process. So I get nervous when we start saying managers, senior managers, directors. The issue here is there's always a danger with super senior people working in these committees. I think the simple rule we must have for committees is that we need to try to have everybody on the same level, and preferably nobody must report to anybody in that committee. There's a couple of committee composition elements that we also need to guard against to make sure that we don't create a scenario that's easy to compromise, meaning there's a specific fraud that has been recently identified, which is referred to as holding sway. And that's typically where very technical people like CIOs or legal people or chartered accountants, people that's got now, you can almost say, heavy qualifications, come and they actually bully the committee and saying that you don't know what you're talking about. It must be done like this. It must be done like that. And then at the end of the day, they get to swing the committee in a certain direction. So we need to also balance the power in the committee. And again, in my view, historically, I've always said this, the BSC is actually one of the more important committees because they create the specification. And if you read any court case, the court cases like looking back at the specification, what was the intent of the specification. So BSC is important. Feedback loops to the BSC is critical to make sure that any mistakes or any lessons learned must be communicated back. Now, theoretically, and again, we must not say the committees is the be all and end all. There's also a group of people involved called supply chain management. And they're actually the communication channel between these committees. Because at the end of the day, the secretariat of the BSC, the BEC, and BAC is supposed to be the same group of people. And that's where the communications. I'm very worried when we want to now move members in between. As it is, the biggest challenge, and sorry, I'm downloading a lot of data now on you guys, but the biggest challenge we experience in government is delays in the evaluation of bids because the committees don't correlate or they don't meet. And having active senior members of your department participate in multiple committees, they've got actually a day job as well. So we must make sure that we don't overburden people who's actually paid to do something else than being on a committee to be in a committee. So, and that's why I believe in small quorums and I believe in relevant people.
Yeah.
A good supply chain system, the knowledge base and the intelligence is supposed to be residing within the supply chain function, and the committees is supposed to give independent views and ask critical questions. The minute we start relying on the technical skills of the committee, we end up setting ourselves up for failure and possibly even manipulation. So that's a bit of understanding from my side. And then at the end of the day, any committee can co-opt anybody from within the organization, the end user, independent technical specialist, whoever, as long as that person doesn't have a vote. So if you really need to bring BSC members into the BEC, or a new favorite practice in many departments in the Eastern Cape is that the BAC actually gets to look at the spec before it's advertised, just to also impart their wisdom around how easy or difficult it is to manipulate or evaluate the bid. And then one last thought, and that sort of encapsulates everything, this one last thought, is remember, if two people in a committee differs about a fact, or if two committees differ around a certain evaluation protocol, any form of people differing ultimately becomes evidence of subjectivity in your bid process. If the bid process doesn't get a reasonable man to get two reasonable people come to the same conclusion, it means your spec is indeed weak and flawed, and you can easily be taken to task in a court of law. Thank you. And sorry for the long speech, but I thought I'd share you everything. Yes.
Let me ask you something. So we're going into a world now where we do have an opportunity to change the rules, to change the regulations. So the PPA is the regulations to the PPA, the Public Procurement Act, are underway. The Public Procurement Act doesn't mention anything about how many committees or what the committees should be. We've got, 20-something years now of experience in running these bid committees in the country. I'm intrigued in some of the discussions that are taking place globally around improving the efficiency of the public procurement process. And one of the points that's coming through is that whenever you've got multiple decision-making points, multiple decision-making entities, you slow the process down. And that's logical. That's inevitable in a system and a process where you've got multiple decision points. There's going to be a delay or not delay, it's going to take longer. Andres, what if we just had one BSC/BEC committee and a BAC committee? So we just have two committees. We have one that does the BSC work, one that does the BEC work, the same one that does the BSC does the BEC work, and the adjudication committee is the one that ensures objectivity and independence. And so we avoid completely this issue that we're getting into, and we try and streamline the process. What are your thoughts on that, Andres? Andres is muted, and I'm going to jump to Malakia, who is based in Gauteng, working for a national entity. Go ahead, Andres.
Sorry, I was just distracted now.
If we were to simplify this whole system, and we just have two committees.
Again, I think you made a strong point. We're 20 years into the game.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're only really starting
to grasp this
get
whole
things
notion.
right now since the tender boards.
That's right.
And there is still issues. And I've just recently a tender that we've evaluated as the provincial bid advisory committee. There's now huge newspaper articles that this whole thing was manipulated, and even the BAC did not, and IBAC did not pick it up. So yes, unfortunately, your number one point of influence and manipulation is the BSC and the BAC, and keeping them independent from each other reduces that. You have to have some form of collusion. And as a forensic investigator myself, the thing we're looking for is where the perfect crime, let me put it this way, the perfect crime is the one that you commit on your own with no partners.
Yeah.
That's the one that's difficult to
find.
unravel. The crime that's easy to find is the minute you have partners, because partners tend to drop you and make mistakes, and so and that's why what we're trying to do with business processes is, and remember, there's a key term in business processes that says segregation of duties.
Yeah.
And we talk about incompatible functions.
Yeah.
And those two business principles sounds right through all the business processes and is critical for business process to work. However, there's a rider to that, and that says collusion cannot be avoided through segregation of duties, because obviously the object of segregation of duties is to avoid collusion.
Correct.
And
it's not the silver bullet. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the minute people start collaborating to defraud the system, you can design your system any way you want to, you will be defrauded. And the trick is to bring all the elements of hiring ethical managers and running an organization on certain principles and looking out for red flags and doing fraud risk assessments to reduce it. Can you eliminate it? No, unfortunately, people are greedy and they will figure out ways how to defraud the system. But sorry, I don't want to make it a conversation with Andres Low. I think that's enough from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Andres. Good one. Thank you. Malakia, welcome. Malakia.
Thank you, Sean. And
we can hear
morning,
you. Welcome.
And good morning, colleagues. Thanks, Sean. Just to make a comment, Sean, based on your earlier point. There is nothing in law or in fact that prescribe that says that we can't have a BSC members also being a BEC member, and
correct.
Vice versa.
We agree.
Or separate them, unless maybe there is a recent case law that I'm not aware of. The Treasury regulations allow for a 3-committee system, but does not go further to prescribe that this must be 2 distinct committees. Now, coming to the point of the colleague from Eastern Cape, BSC it's a very important committee, because down the line, if things goes wrong, then it means that it leads to the cancellation. And to the point of Sanele, that the cancellations compromises the service delivery. I think if we can be service delivery orientated, because we have done the study on the number of cancellations in my previous life. So we found that the wrong specifications they lead to the cancellation, and we found that sometimes it's not the wrong specifications, but the BECs are unable to evaluate sometimes if you've got them independent, you know, they're unable to evaluate what it has been specified, and even the points and so forth, you know. There's a whole lot of ambiguity and so forth. So based on that, then I will go with the notion that says that the very same members of the BSC must be the members of the BEC, you know, to make sure that there is no cancellations that lead to the compromise of service delivery. Because we really need to be service delivery oriented. We've got a number of potholes that have led to swimming pools, you know.
Thanks, Malakia. Let's jump to Khomotso. Folk, I've got a poll running at the moment, and it's asking a future question. This future question, not too far in the future, is probably happening now, is what do you believe we should have in the regulations? Do you believe that we must be prescribed? The regulations should say no BSC members, or should it say some BSC members should be in the BEC? Or should it not even prescribe membership rules? Just let's not prescribe that because, or you're unsure. Give us your views. Go ahead, Khomotso, and then we'll jump to Tsepo and then Sanel.
Thank you, Sean. Colleagues, let's keep in mind that having all these committees, their main purpose is to ensure that the accounting officers adhere to the PFMA or the MFMA by having a procurement system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. So for us to be able to behave with that, the BSC, their job is to ensure that they provide us with the specification of the TORs that are very transparent, very clear, that even the person outside would understand them and be able to bid. And then in a case where there are uncertainty about the clarity of the specification or the terms of references, that is where you would invite a technical expert. Their role is to translate the functions requirements into the requirements of the end user, into the technical specification, which are going to clearly define the goods or the services to be procured, and then ensure that they're in a manner that is illicit for service providers to be able to respond, provide us with responses. And then the other issue is that the technical experts who will be giving us the TORs, assisting us with the TORs, must also ensure that they draft those in an unbiased manner, so that every service provider that is interested can be able to submit their bid. And then getting back to the question that you asked to Andres about having BEC/BSC, I do not think
not three committees.
I do not think that will be proper if you match BEC and BSC, because it will open up room for possible biasness, possible conflict of interest.
But we've got we can put all those controls in place, though, Khomotso.
It's like it will be like one is a referee, a match commissioner, and a VAR at the same time.
But that's the BAC's job, right? The adjudication committee is the referee, is the adjudicator.
The BSC must make sure that the field is clear, the rules are set, everything is there in line. Then the BEC are going to apply everything that was being set by the BSC. That is where the technical experts come in to ensure that the spec is clear, the next person can be able to read it.
But why have two committees? We're just over-engineering this whole thing. I mean, there are many comments that have been made to say, but you know, many institutions do not have a lot of people, a lot of employees, and they don't have enough people to put on these different committees. So why don't we just take this opportunity now? We slash 3 committees down to 2.
Fortunately, you're speaking to exactly a guy who is in an institution with less employees. In our institution, we do have members of the BSC who are sitting in the BEC.
Yeah, good.
The reason is because we wanted people in accounting in responsible functions to be
Got
able
you,
to be
got
in
you.
those committees. So you cannot be having juniors in those committees who won't be able to take accountability. We wanted people in management to be able to be in those committees. However, not all of them serve in the BSC than the BEC.
Got you, got you.
Only less. And the only thing that is key about this is that if we have not invited a technical expert and we had somebody from a particular division giving us the technicalities of the item that needs to be procured or the services that need to be procured, the very same individual can still go into the BSC, into the BEC, because of the limits that we have in terms of staff capacity. Thank you.
Good one. Come on, so I'm gonna jump to Tsepo. And Sanela, I'm just going to give a couple of other guys a chance, Akele and Busi. Tsepo, welcome.
All right, thank you, Sean, and good morning, colleagues. Yeah, this is an interesting topic. In actual fact, it has got a high interest in my heart. It's something that I was looking to pursue forward in my academic journey. I strongly believe the BSc and BEC should be different members. However, there must somehow between the two have some element of a discussion prior to the BEC evaluation to transfer the expectations from the BSc to the BEC. And remember the BEC.
May I just ask your context? Have you had a lot of experience in MFMA or where has your experience been primarily?
It's PFMA.
PFMA, interesting. Go ahead, Tsepo.
Yeah. So what my hypothetical, analysis and understanding and envisaged, results will be to say that the BEC should be impartial.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this impartiality is a very huge question. How do you ensure impartiality?
Yeah.
Is to ensure that all evaluations and contract awards
why do you think why do you think so? Because
why do I think
they should be impartial?
Because it has to be based on merit and compliance and without favoritism or corruption.
Yeah.
And remember, based on my experience, I've noted this.
Yeah.
The specifications team tend to cloud the judgment of the evaluation team, especially the new ones.
Yeah.
So that has got an impact into negativity of ensuring impartiality. So therefore, I strongly believe that, and one of the things that I'll be looking at as well will be to see, like the previous speaker said, organizations with a small, number of employees that can affect, service delivery, efficiency, and effectiveness. So those are the key things that we need to look at. But somehow the state tender board method kind of like a thing within a spectrum of similar, organizations. Because Sean, if you are a technologist, you should be able to evaluate any technological bid that is relative to your experience and expertise, irrespective whether you were the BSc or not. If we need an engineer who is registered with, EXA, it's objective.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as you are an engineer, you can validate, that should be done.
Okay.
So for that strong reasons, I believe the BEC and the BSc, there should be different members and so forth to ensure good governance.
So Tsepo, you're writing the the Public Procurement Act regulations. Would you be that prescriptive in the regulations? Do you believe the regulations should prescribe that there should be no members of the BSc involved?
I could leave that to the respective, organs of state for now, for the fact that, I don't want to be, I wouldn't want it to be too prescriptive.
Okay.
But as a, that's where I am. Thanks, my Sean.
Thank you. Zakele?
Thank you, Sean. For me, colleagues, I feel like it doesn't matter whether it's same members or not, because the evaluation is based on what you've issued to the market.
Yes.
So
yes.
there
It
should be
doesn't
no
matter. Hey,
subjectivity during
yeah.
the evaluation. So why
Yeah.
then you need even
Yeah.
need independence? Because the criteria is prescribed and you just stick with the criteria, and then the reviewer will come in and see whether you stick with the criteria or not. So for me, there's no difference. And to answer your question, no, the regulation should not even try to interfere. Let it just be silent. We will decide on
Let
our
the
own how
Eskom
to set
translate.
ourselves.
Yeah, good one. Good one. Thank you. Thank you. Gloria. Welcome, Gloria.
Thank you, Sean. And good morning to members. I've just have an observation in your results that there's a difference in the MFMA
There
and
is.
PFMA in
Yes.
terms of whether the BEC, must have BSC members or not. And I'm interested, why is there a difference? There something that is different that we don't know? What could prompt that difference? If there's someone who can maybe, because I look at it that it should be the same. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's where we are, and that's why we want to try and reduce this fragmentation. I don't know if there's anyone around. Kevin Naik is here, and he might have a view, if he can cast his mind back to those days, as to why that was decided. Just in general, I've seen that there were certainly some wording in the PFMA prescripts that came out at the time, which were improved on from an MFMA perspective. But why get specific on these kind of things? Interesting. Yeah, let's see. So I'm going to share the results now. Hey, Andres can maybe help out. Hello, Andres, welcome.
Yes, I think I just want to maybe give a perspective why there would be a difference.
Yeah.
I don't think it is the legislation that creates the difference. It's actually the let's call it the group that's answering the poll.
Yeah.
Because remember, municipalities is technically speaking small departments or
Correct.
smaller
Correct.
entities. So there would be a strong inclination for municipalities to say, we think it might be a good idea to combine the BSC and BSC and BEC because of that practicality, which was already brought up in the conversation. So,
but that's
I don't
interesting,
think
Andres,
it's a
because it's
legislation
exactly the
difference.
opposite reason, isn't it? So the MFMA prescripts are saying separate committees, that you should not have the same members in the BEC that were in the BSC.
Remember now, like I said, the people, the municipalities who's under that pressure of saying we don't have enough people to create the necessary segregation of duties will be more inclined to actually, sorry, there's somebody talking, would be more inclined to be supportive of such an idea for practical reasons. That's all I'm saying.
Got you.
But again, remember that if you look at how the legislation is currently being unpacked, I'm specifically thinking of the last circular that came from National Treasury, which seeks to devolve more responsibility to the departments.
Correct. You're talking about the PFMA.
Back to the argument of, shall we legislate? Well, the current legislative movement is give the accounting officer the responsibility to manage the situation. Don't try to be managing everything from a central location. Because, as I say, the more rules you make, the more opportunity to break them, and that ends up costing us our credibility. Thank you.
Good one. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to end this poll now and just share this with you. And then we're going to ask Kevin to come in. Welcome, Kevin. So, Kevin, I'm going to share this, and So this is saying, very interesting, the majority of people, by 51%, say that we must prescribe that some members of the BEC can be the BSC, and then, yeah, 20% is saying that should not prescribe membership rules. 16% are saying that it must be prescriptive, that no BSC members should be in. And then there's a 13% are unsure. Kevin, can you cast your mind back to those early days of putting regulations and guidelines in place as to why there might have been a difference and why MFMA then brought in, because you had a strong MFMA involvement, why MFMA sought to try and make the membership of the two different committees, BEC and BSC, different. Go ahead, Kevin.
Morning, Sean.
Good morning.
Yes, thank you very much. I was listening to the conversations very, very attentively, and I heard, all the comments made by the various officials. Yes, Sean, man, it's a long time ago when we started with this process, and I'm trying to cast my mind back to what happened more than 20 years ago. But one of the gentlemen, who spoke earlier said that in terms of the PFMA, it is not legislated. It's 100% correct.
Correct, yeah.
The PFMA doesn't indicate who should be members of the various committees. There's a circular that was issued by Jan Breitenbach, I think in 2003, implementation of the SCM. And towards the end of that circular, they talk about the various bid committees. And there they gave some flexibility to the institutions, to the departments, to say that BSC members may also be members of BEC. But BEC members must not be a member of the BAC for obvious reasons.
Absolutely.
You cannot be a referee and player at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, in the MFMA environment, it is very explicit. It is by law that states that the members must be different members. And when we put together the regulations for the municipalities way back, there was a reference group that National Treasury called to provide inputs and discuss the regulations. And they were very strong on the fact that the members should be separate. Also for reasons obvious to us, to keep the objectivity, to have its independence, and to ensure, that there's no corruption involved. So that is why you'll find in the SCM regulation for municipalities, it differs in terms of the operations in the PFMA environment, that it is prescribed that the committees or the members must be different. My personal taking on this is that I would, because I worked in provincial, national, and local government, and I've got experience through all spheres of government. My last stint at the Metro ended recently in December, and I can tell you it works much better when there are different members in the committees.
Interesting, Kevin.
Yes, it works much better if you have different members, in the various committees. It takes away that subjectivity. But you must ensure that you have strong people. You have people who's got an expertise in BSC, especially when it comes to infrastructure, because that's where your biggest challenges are in infrastructure.
Yeah.
You need the technical guys. You need the project managers to, if they're not members, but to be there in an advisory capacity, whether they're in BSC or whether they're in BSC. They must provide guidance. So you can have your core members, and where I was, and some other municipalities where I was attached to, it works fine to have different members for BSC and BEC. When we started with the regulations for the PFMA, you know, it was a test, so sort of a test and go situation, and that was the basis that was used for the MFMA regulations as well. But I think over the years also, you know, even when I was at Treasury, we've realized that it works much better the way it operates in the municipalities. Flexibility were given, yes, then, because you've got smaller entities, you know, smaller public entities that doesn't have sufficient staff, and therefore there was that flexibility was given. So I think the idea now in terms of the PPA is to ensure that there are different members, and I would agree with that principle, Sean. That's my taking.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Good one. Thank you. Thank you. Let's jump to Sanele, then Betsy, and then Henry. Hi, Sanele. And then we'll wrap up after Henry. Go ahead.
Right. Thanks, Sean. Thanks to the colleagues. I have a different reading of the municipal SCM regulations when it comes to the composition of the bid committees. The reason why I'm saying that is because of the regulations 29, which deals with the bid adjudication committee.
Yeah.
And if you read the regulation 29.4, it says neither a member of the BEC nor an advisor or a person assisting the evaluation committee may be a member of the bid adjudication committee. And that is the only time. Sorry?
That's adjudication committee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the only time the municipal SCM regulations are prescriptive of who need not to be in this committee.
Yeah.
This is where they decide to segregate. And between the BSC, which is Regulation 27, and the BEC, which is Regulation 28, there is no mention of any kind of segregation between the members. And the reason why I'm raising this point is because if the drafters of the legislation, and maybe my colleague that just spoke was part of the process, if the drafters of this document had an intention of segregating the two, they would have then spelled it out. But it's not that probably it was an oversight or they forgot. They knew that there is no conflict of interest, and they would let it be the organs of states that decide if they want to have cross-functioning committees in these two. So that is one, Sean. I think we want to. I still maintain the point. You know, as I was voting, I voted that I was unsure.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why I voted unsure is because of the experience in the circumstances that we have faced in the application of SCM processes. If you prescribe things in the legislation, you must understand that you will live with that for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might be helpful because of the current circumstances, it might solve, and then there will be probably new prevailing incorrect practices that will try to work against that prescription. And you might think that maybe we need to remove this provision, and that will be a lengthy process. Again, if you do not prescribe it and say no members, or there must be members, it also gonna fall on the same fate. So that's for me is a bit of a tricky situation because you know, the prescribing by way of legislation is a long process. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sanele. Betsy, good morning.
Colleagues, yeah. Oh, what an interesting topic, Sean. But where I'm coming from to say, I think my colleagues have already covered me. But the interesting part, how do we balance the system perspective and the transaction perspective? Because when you look at this, the procurement system, when you can balance it and say they can play, but when we come to a transactional point, and then that the conflict of interest and the principle of segregation of duties, that's when it's like then the question is like, isn't it that the legislation needs to balance those two perspectives to say, yes, from a system point of view, yes, we can have these members playing a part. But when we come to a transaction, how do we come and balance that? Let me leave it at that. Thanks, colleagues.
Good one. Thanks, Betsy. Henry, and we've got to give Tandile a chance. Henry, and then we'll end with Tandile. Hi, Henry.
Hi, Sean. Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting topic, as I imagined it would be. Interesting also that you smiling here softly, that you didn't bring up the 2020 version of the Public Procurement Act, obviously for a reason, where they did provide some indication as to what they might have in the regulation. When I say they, Treasury, right? So if you look at that, oh, okay, so you had it there.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so you did have it. Okay. So interesting, like that is also at some point, and it was interesting when you asked Kevin the question around Treasury and the initial thoughts. Because if you remember in 2011, 2012, and I'm speaking PFMA now, Treasury brought out the draft Treasury regulations, which never got implemented. And that is actually very similar to the thing that you're showing me on the board.
Correct.
On the screen here now, which was interesting because, you know, by that stage, there were already 10 years or no, okay,
yeah,
so a
bit
less than 10 years, but quite a while of practice in it.
Correct.
And so that was fresh in the mind. So it would be interesting to know why they then changed it to these at least 3 people and not too prescriptive. There must be a supply chain person, blah, blah, blah. And why they left it at that and didn't get too prescriptive as far as that's concerned. Well, I agree with that at the time. I'm still agreeing with that. That shouldn't be too prescriptive. There should be some, like, this is not a problem for me. It's not too prescriptive. I mean, there's practical way why you want somebody from supply chain there. There's a practical reason why, where practical, you want a user there because that's the person that's going to own the solution. So those makes all kind of practical sense. So the only issue that I, for example, had with the draft version of the June 2020, what was in the June 2020 version, is that they did say in there, which is the point we're discussing, is that they did have there that the BSC members cannot be BEC members. So that was the only issue at the time that I had with that particular content there. And you see it. I mean, we see it all the way. We can't be too prescriptive as far as that's concerned, because at the moment, if you just look at the practicality that we talked about, a lot of people mentioned the practicality. I mean, so we know, for example, that there's some institutions, some small PFMA institutions that's got 2 SCM unit members. So how do you then split, you know? And that's why, I mean, it's actually funny sometimes when I'm sitting on those bid committee meetings, is a lot of times then they make the SCM person can't vote. So almost in the, you know, so you sit in, but you're not really sitting in type of thing, which is which is actually a funny thing. Anyway, so that's just my, so I think again, at the end of the day, whoever drives this legislation needs to listen to all of these practicality issues. And there could be some high level things, but it mustn't be too prescriptive.
Good one. Thanks, Henry.
That's my view.
Thank you. Good one. Tandile, you got the last word. Malakia, sorry, man. We're going to give Tandile the last opportunity.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Greetings, colleagues. I've been away from the platform for some time, Sean. Interesting discussion.
No, but nice to see you on in the past couple of weeks. Go ahead.
Yes, I wonder, Sean, if these discussion pointers, they will find their way to National Treasury in some way. I wonder, because these are very good discussions we're having here, colleagues. Maybe, Sean, let me just give 2 examples. Firstly, regulation should not prescribe. And then why I'm saying that, maybe let's hear out my 2 examples here. So I've worked for Kuka Development Corporation. So it is an implementing agent, right? That does procurement on behalf of various departments. So they take the procurement very seriously. So in that case, they have a fixed BSC committee that consists of senior members. So in that case, it's a standard BSC set for 2 years, and then your BEC, then it becomes ad hoc. And obviously your BEC, because you put too much work on the BSC with this your tender documentation and the evaluation criteria. When it gets to BEC, it doesn't matter who's there. It becomes easy to evaluate because you put more weight on it on BSC. Then you've got a second scenario. I work for Agricultural Research Council. So the council is a research facility or entity. So they don't put much focus on procurement. So we then had the ad hoc BSC and ad hoc BEC. And unfortunately, we didn't have much of support staff. So we had to use these members on board committees. We didn't have much of a choice. So in that case, for ARC, it was working because we didn't have enough staff to actually separate. And so I think those are the two scenarios. And that's why then I'm saying, let the regulation not prescribe that members cannot be used in board committees. Thanks, Sean.
Good one, Tandile. Thank you, folk. There, some really interesting points. Just to answer your question, Tandile, I have heard from some of the Treasury folk that they do go to the YouTube chat platform and do have a look at that. If there are some specific things, then Treasury know they're welcome to come online and ask and participate. I haven't seen today, but there are very often members from Treasury who do listen in, and I don't want to put them on a spot and bring them into the discussion and the dialogue. It sometimes doesn't quite work for them if we do that, but very often there are members who do attend these, and they're very aware of the session, and they're very aware of the YouTube platform. Just to mention, I was a little bit delayed in getting last week's video onto the platform. It is there. It's just awaiting one or two little changes for myself, and then we'll get today's version on there as well. So thanks very much, everybody. We're trying to keep these practical. We're trying to keep them focused on topics that are relevant to you in public procurement. And by all accounts, the interest is growing in this platform, and we'll keep going. All the best. Have a great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.